Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rich Berliner from Connected Real Estate Tech Event, and I'm very pleased to be here with some illustrious participants on this panel. This is the last panel of the event, by no means the least. It's going to be a very interesting back and forth between our real estate experts and John Morris, who is our technical expert. So without further ado, why don't we just have each of you introduce yourself. Nick, please, would you start us off?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Nick Listello, Senior Vice President of Infrastructure at Vornado Realty Trust.
Good. John Gilbert.
Hey, everybody. John Gilbert, Chief Operating Officer, Executive Vice President for the Rudin family.
Thank you. John Morris.
I'm the CEO of Ballast Networks. We build private networks.
Now, John, isn't Jacksonville going to get Trevor Lawrence tonight? Isn't that the way it goes?
Maybe.
I think they pick first because
the
Jets obviously, to my dismay, screwed this up. So the Jets no longer had the first pick, but I believe Jacksonville now has that. So I'm glad you have a project down there because there's going to be a great deal of celebration.
Totally.
Anyway, so John, I wanted to start with you. This is a panel that's got real understanding of CBRS and private LTE, but I don't know that our audience does as deep an understanding as they should. So John Gilbert and I have been talking about this for a number of years, but I'm starting to see real estate folks get more and more into this, but I don't know that there's real deep understanding of what this is all about. Can you help enlighten people that might be watching about what is CBRS? Is it a technology? Is it a frequency? Is it an ice cream flavor? What is it?
And I assume that John Morris, right?
Yes, please.
So thanks, Rich. I appreciate you having me. From my perspective, CBRS and private networks, there's a lot of different characteristics and a lot of different reasons why, a CBR or a corporate real estate environment, MDU type environment might want to have this kind of technology in place. But there's a few kind of data points I think that talk to this particular piece. And one is that you've got, maybe, 60,000 buildings in Manhattan, and maybe 300 of them have a distributed antenna system. And with data growing at 40% a year in terms of the amount of capacity that's needed in this building to support these kind of connectivity needs, we think that there's going to be a lot of need for alternative networks. And those alternative networks that are owned by the enterprise, managed by the enterprise, have a whole bunch of benefits that are tied to tenant amenities, security, ingress, egress, things like COVID management, and there's a whole lot of other kinds of applications for this, including like data offload and roaming, again, that allow for these building owners, whether it's Rudin or Vornado or other property owners, to leverage these technologies to create a better environment in those buildings at a lower price point, but also solve connectivity issues that they may be not able to solve because of what carriers may or may not pay for, depending on the size and quality and nature of their building. And so we think there's a whole lot of benefits that are, probably too long to go on this particular call, but I think there's, if you have to do a wired network and you have to put in a single plug, it typically costs you like $350 a drop. And with kind of the volume of change that we expect to see in these kind of environments over the coming years, I just see that the more IoT you have, the more dense the populations in these buildings, the more you're going to have these needs for private networks. And CBRS, which is the spectrum that's allocated by the government for use in these networks, really opened up a whole lot of possibility and created the opportunity we have here. And then, of course, you've got software eating telecom, where a lot of these functions are being virtualized that allow these to be deployed at a reasonable price point. And so all of these things have come together, and these are the reasons that I would expect, CRE owners to really want to participate in this kind of network.
Got it. So, John Gilbert, you and I have talked about CBRS for a long time. You've been really working hard at it for a number of years, and really kind of inundated yourself and learned what this was all about. Do you think you're unique in the fact that it benefits you more than it does certain other people because of the way your company is set up, because of Nantum, because of other things? Do you feel that it has special benefits for you, or is this just something that is good for real estate folks across the board, using it in different ways maybe than you?
Well, Rich, I started back in the real estate world when, the 22.8 dial-up was a lot of bandwidth, and a T1 was like, the Ferrari of Ferraris. What the FCC has given to property owners is 150 megahertz of wireless spectrum. This is a huge pipe. And back in the day, a wise person once told me there is no such thing as too much bandwidth. So it caught our attention simply because we are now gifted a license in which to provide telecommunication services either by ourselves or with a telecommunications partner. So that's one. Two, as we began to, in our journey of extracting data out of our buildings and making that data valuable and ultimately sharing it with our tenants, it became very clear that the more granular the data we could grab, the more valuable it became. But when we started to go up into our tenant floors, and we knew that the central nervous system that we needed to build had to be wireless. And as we began to expand Wi-Fi, we began to see more and more interference issues and bumping up against everybody else's guest Wi-Fi or enterprise Wi-Fi network. So when the FCC came out and said, oh, well, we're going to go up to 3.5 to 3.7 gigahertz, away from a lot of the noise that we were seeing and interfering with, I was like, oh my goodness, this is unbelievable. I got clean spectrum. I got a big pipe. I've got, the opportunity to start extracting data out of my tenant spaces. Beautiful. And then what happened? What happened was every single major publicly traded company has declared their journey towards carbon neutrality or carbon net zero. Well, guess what? In order for that to happen, the property owner who ultimately has gone into a lease with those folks has to ultimately come up with a strategy and a platform that allows that data to be extracted, segmented, delivered back to the tenant in an authenticated way so that customer can use that data as they express to the world and to the marketplace how they are net zero or neutral. So we started to see that the data was connected to sustainability, was connected to the relationship that we had with our customers, which ultimately required infrastructure to be able to extract that data. And to me, CBRS hit it out of the park.
Gotcha. So you've got in a lot of these buildings, you've got DAS systems already. This has nothing to do with that for you. This is more, standalone system that works for you in terms of this data capture.
To me, they should be able to exist side by side.
Right.
They can do different things. They can do, one can be a data extractor. The other one can ultimately bring cellular telephone, connectivity into the building. Both of them can ultimately do that. And all the new phones have the CBRS chip in it. But to me, it brought greater security. This, everything that John Morris talked about in terms of the data security, the private LTE, migration and acceleration to 5G. That's why the FCC did this in the first place. It wasn't because they had a bunch of friends in the real estate industry. They were trying to push 5G and accelerate that deployment as fast as they possibly could. And they saw real estate and the ability to light buildings from within and not from without as the opportunity to do that.
Right. You coined a phrase that I use all the time. I should be paying you 5 cents a usage on that, but the great gift that the government has given to real estate.
FCC has never given real estate anything. And this is a game changer. I believe, Rich, had it not been for COVID, and you can say this about a lot of things, but had it not been for COVID, when the FCC announced this last January, this would have been a huge story. But it just got buried by this, pandemic that we're in the middle of.
Yeah. So Nick, many commercial real estate companies have DAS systems in there. And, the coming of what John is talking about with private LTE using CBRS frequencies,
Right.
Are there issues or will there be good coexistence between these things in your judgment? And how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes, there has to be. And what John Gilbert had mentioned regarding, the need for CBRS for collecting data for sustainability purposes, right? We obviously, we've been in the forward-leaning sustainability posture, if you will, for many years. And I think on a go-forward basis, we could potentially look at what the CBRS spectrum can do for us for our buildings moving forward. But in terms of coexisting, they need to. John Morris had mentioned 300 properties, I believe, in New York City, 300 buildings. John, thereabouts have been buildings.
Yeah, there's under 300 that actually have a proper DAS, and there's about 60,000 buildings in Manhattan.
Right. So I'm not sure what your definition of a proper DAS is. I hope we have them because we built a lot together.
We did.
But, look, we've had a big belief way back when that in-building cellular is more than an amenity, as we all know. It's turned into that. It's turned into a requirement, and our sort of march to CBRS is perhaps a little bit more reserved than Mr. Gilbert's, and we still have the same needs. Look, John, we're in the commercial real estate business in New York City. There's not a lot in terms of corporate secrets that we don't know about each other in terms of how we want to operate our buildings and what is the most efficient way of doing that. And I do believe that, between both Johns, for me, that, we can speak about what works and what doesn't. We have ideas of, perhaps in the future where we can get the most beneficial sort of positive net result out of a CBRS system. Again, outside of an in-building cell, it's for a different use. And we agree security is also very important for us, as it is for everyone. So I think as we march forward, John has done a lot of good things, John Gilbert, in his portfolio in terms of CBRS. And I know John Morris is doing a lot of things. You had mentioned Jacksonville. And look, I believe we are looking at the landscape. It is sort of now being spoken about in a larger group, a larger crowd. It's more of an acceptance. And we're looking to see how it all fits in for our needs in our buildings.
Right. So John Morris, John Gilbert mentioned that there's 150 megahertz of spectrum here. And so that is a combination of the two types of CBRS spectrum. There's the PAL spectrum and the GAA spectrum. But John, but any of these fellows, both Nick or John, has the ability to use all of it as long as they adhere to a series of rules. So I'm going to ask a two-part question. So how do the PAL licenses and the GAA licenses coexist? I'm using that coexist word a lot today. And also, how does it work on the phone side of things at this point? I'm hearing things from the OnGo Alliance, and I'm hearing things from some of the manufacturers about the telephony portion of this at the moment. So can you talk to us about the spectrum piece and then about the telephony piece?
Absolutely. So the first thing is, and the 150 megahertz is absolutely right, but it's divided into two parts. We've got the priority access licenses, and you've got the general authorized access licenses. And for those PAL licenses, people have paid for those licenses, and then the government has set aside a portion of the spectrum solely for the use of those buildings, building owners and enterprises to deploy their own networks. The in terms of how those that spectrum gets used, particularly in a building, those PAL licenses have a 10-year lifespan on them, and they have to be used or other people can use them. And one of the things that's really interesting about all of this is, if you think about the quality of service that you get under a private network, part of the reason that you get that quality of service is because that spectrum is what I call lightly licensed, as opposed to unlicensed or licensed by, as part of the carrier portfolio. And so that lightly licensed platform means that there's something that guarantees allocation of that spectrum for uses in a particular location in a building, so that you don't have situations where, like you can have with Wi-Fi, where you can't get a channel. You can't log on to an SSID. You can't do something else with that quality of service that you would expect to provide to your tenants, and provide those amenities, particularly as the data growth that we expect to happen, that's happening today, continues in these in-building environments. And so both GAA and those PAL licenses play a role. The people that have bought PAL licenses have mechanisms to sublicense those licenses as well. And you're going to end up with a mix of a use of both GAA and PAL licenses as part of the process. And for us, this is really interesting, because now you can set policy. You can do certain things on that system that's in between what you would expect out of the carrier system, where you have no control, and a system like this where you have 100% control in a way that you can control your Wi-Fi. So we think that's very compelling. When it comes to what we call the UEs, because it's not just phones for us, it's tablets, it's any kind of end user devices that are there. We did some math, and we think that the penetration of chipsets on these devices will take about 3 years, based on the cycle of people trading in their phones and doing different things. There's about a 32 to 33 month cycle on people trading in their phones. And right now, if you look at the iPhone portfolio, we think about 20% of that iPhone portfolio today, in terms of active users, has that CBRS chipset. And so over time, you'll see that penetration in the same way you saw Wi-Fi, where the chipsets end up in all of the tablets and all of the computers and all of the. Right now, I think, like I said, I think we're at about 20% of the new devices, and I think it's going to be about a 3-year cycle, based on basic math, basic assumptions. And then, fundamentally, there's software to this, and both John and Nick know that, when a lot of times when this software is first released, it's kind of clunky. It's not perfect. And so a lot of what you see with eSIMs and what they call dual SIM, dual standby, to be able to flick or go between a carrier network and go to a private network, it's a little bit of work right now. And what we expect is that as software improves, as Apple, Facebook, Google do more in terms of these platforms that are really driving a lot of this, we would expect to see that this become much more commonplace, much easier to do, and it allows John, Nick, other people to build these kind of systems, what I would say, in lieu of DAS. So you can provide all of the data benefits and other things, but you can also provide these other benefits. And I think that's the big promise of these kind of systems.
Gotcha.
So Rich,
Go ahead, Nick.
I'm sorry. So what I did want to just touch upon in what John had mentioned, the difference between the GAA and the PAL licenses, right? The GAA, in terms of it not being the the PAL is an expensive spectrum in which to acquire. And again, John, as you stated, it has to be used. There's a 10-year lifespan on it, or else you lose it. The GAA is really perfect for commercial real estate owners where it doesn't penetrate the building. And John, correct me if I'm wrong here, it doesn't penetrate the building. It's for use within the building typically because of the way the layout of the building, the windows and things like that. And it keeps the signal inside, and the PAL is typically used for outside campuses and outside utilization. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I would even take it a step further and say that, LEED certified buildings, you talked about sustainability. I think John Gilbert mentioned that. LEED certified buildings have the glass windows that have metal in them, and metal is really terrible for propagation.
Right.
And it's something I didn't touch on when I was talking about data growth in terms of the need for these kinds of networks. But you're spot on, Nick. And one of the reasons that I think you're going to see more demand, but also greater benefit from these GAA licenses, is because you're able to control that signal in the space. Particularly, I mean, you both have amazing buildings that are LEED certified,
right.
And things don't penetrate. I mean, signal doesn't go outside in very good, or very easily, rather.
Got it. So,
but John, just a second. To me, the biggest issue here, and you lightly touched on it, but it'd be great if you drilled down a little bit more, is the ability to segment this frequency so that, okay, Vornado can keep their own 10 megahertz and do whatever the heck they want to do with that 10 megahertz. It's not spread spectrum. It is identifiable and segmented. And then the other piece is in terms of cybersecurity, the ability to ultimately keep whatever's happening within that wireless spectrum. You can keep it secure. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think security is a major feature of this. I mean, when you have a fully virtualized system that's the entire soup to nuts on from a technical stack perspective, built on the PPP protocol, which is the LTE protocol that's carrier grade. So you're talking about a carrier grade network in a building. I think it's a game changer because of you're able to absolutely keep that data secure. And so, a lot of the issues people are concerned about in terms of firewalls and people penetrating IoT and other kind of devices. Well, if everything's wireless and convenient, but it also is based on this PPP protocol where you can set the policy, where you can ensure the quality of service. And there's in terms of even level of security, you can not only can you segment how you manage those networks, because 5G has the slicing feature that allows you to say, hey, I want to allocate bandwidth in certain ways, even within your own network. What's really powerful for me is that all this control that is integrated within all of your IT networks. You're not managing the separate network. Now, whether you choose to do that with the business partner is a separate issue, because I know that you and Nick, John, you and Nick have lots of partners out there that are very capable of, or that are interacting with you today on all kinds of different IT. But you can manage everything holistically under a common SLA. And you can have a carrier grade network, and Wi-Fi is fantastic. I actually think you need Wi-Fi, you need both. I'm not an either or kind of guy, but let people surf on Wi-Fi, let them do what they need on, downloading Netflix, in their lunch hour and watch that, whatever, do that. And then, the other pieces you can do on something that's a quality network that kind of fits the protocols of what it is, the brand that's Vornado, the brand that's Rudin Properties,
The security and the segmentation you're saying are far more advanced and inherent in the CBRS network. And I think that was John's question as well.
Carrier grade system. So John, the question I was going to ask, John Gilbert, the question I was going to ask you is, I always think of you as being one step ahead of everybody else. And I guess I wonder, was the 345 Park Avenue sort of serendipity because you had thought ahead of people? In other words, it had an enormous amount of fiber in the building. The ceiling was off because you were doing some work there. You had a need for something you saw as an absolute vital situation as we go forward to control the carbon emissions. Was that serendipity or was that planned? How did that come together for you?
It was total, fear. And the fear was we were going to renovate the lobby and it was going to be all closed up and beautiful. And then Gilbert was going to come along and say, "Oh, wait a minute, I got to open up some of these, this beautiful work that you all have done because I want to put some radios up there for CBRS." That was never going to happen. The answer to that was going to be go take a hike. We used to have a tenant down at 55 Broad Street when we were doing the tech center down there, and their motto was, if you're not on the cutting edge, you're taking up too much space. And for this one, Rich, it really was about timing. We were opening up that ceiling. Nick knows what it's like to renovate a lobby when you got people, 5,000 people moving in and out of that building a day. It's a royal pain in the neck. So the key was once that thing was open, get those radios in there, run that fiber, and get it ready. And then, paper the deal, get the deal done, but paper it later. So that's really what we were focused on. Knowing we knew less than we knew, right? So it was all new. It was like, what is this? How do we use it? What's this, segmentation stuff? What is all this stuff? And, we just kind of said, this is the right thing to do and it's the right time to do it. So let's do it. The Crown Castle is our telecom partner on this. They were, lockstep with us in terms of they already had fiber in the building. We had a long-term relationship with them. So there were a lot of things that we could get done. If it was a brand new kiss and hug, it wouldn't have gotten done.
Yeah, and you had the benefit, quote unquote, of the fact that there were many fewer people in the building during all this. So there wasn't as much of a crush of people coming up trying to get into the building, it seems to me, while you were ripping the ceiling open and putting radios in there. Am I right, or was that not the case?
Well, we kind of straddled it. We started the project in late 19. So by the time we got to March of 20, when Cuomo rang the bell and said everybody needs to go home, we were, halfway done. So we kind of straddled it, but we got it done quicker with people not being around for sure.
I think this is an extension of, I think what we all typically do is if you're running one strand, run four, right? The economies of scale are there. Now, instead of just running conduit, you're actually putting active antenna equipment perhaps and other things to future proof, right? And you may not have an exact plan today as it's going up, but you're correct. Getting back into those ceilings, especially in the lobby, is very difficult, and adding extra conduit, or in this case, antennas, equipment, would serve sort of all of us much better in the long run.
Yeah,
right?
The cost of that fiber is a lot less than the cost of that union gate.
For anybody who, Nick knows this as well as anybody, we're even within our own companies, there's a lot of elbowing and, arm wrestling that goes on within a project. And, IT may come in with an idea and construction's like, no, it's going to slow me down.
Right.
So, you need an arbiter in there to kind of say, okay, we could do this, we can do that. Yeah, those dollars will be allocated, someplace else so that everybody looks good. But you've got to have a vision of what, Nick said the two words, which is future proof. All of us, as we undertake these capital projects, we need to be basically loading in things that, we don't know what they're going to be used for today, but we know they're going to be used tomorrow for something valuable. And if we wait, it's going to cost us a hell of a lot more.
Right. And one other point with that is in the time that we are in today, capital isn't what it used to be 2 years ago. And having justification for additional capital in an already large project, that sometimes can be difficult, right? Depending on the project, depending on the amount of capital. But to say, well, we're future proofing, I don't know about you, John Gilbert, but I don't know how that goes over in Rudin. You need sort of an ROI, and you need to show some value with that. And, I think as we continue this, this CBRS path, that will become more into focus for us for sure.
So Nick, the relationship with landlord and tenants on this topic, you start putting these things in a building, or anyone starts putting, CBRS in their building. And then you knock on the tenant's door and you say, hey, we're doing a CBRS network in here. And they look at you like you got three heads. How does that work in terms of, making sure that the tenants are comfortable, making sure that you look at this with customer service in mind, and making sure that they are up to speed on what it can do for them?
It's a good question. I would ask John how that went in your installation. I can tell you from an in-building cell implementation, it's certainly different. Everyone has one of these, right? And they understand what it's used for, and they know the three big, carriers, and it's pretty much self-explanatory. I think a CBRS implementation will be a little bit more of an uphill battle, a little bit more of an education, depending on what we plan on doing with it, right? So if you don't mind, I'd like to ask John, because I'm curious, and Rich, that's a great question. How was the tenants' reaction? How did that go in terms of implementation and education, if any, for the tenants? Was it not brought up? I'm curious. And Rich, if I may take your spotlight just for a second. I'm curious, John.
Myself. John?
Well, I'm gonna ask John Morris what he thinks. So,
well, I mean, I have to tell you.
I'm just kidding, John. Obviously, all of us, whether it's Vornado, whether it's Rudin, we're dealing with a level of sophistication within our customer base. It's very, very high.
Yes.
The minute you start talking about private LTE, you immediately go to the cybersecurity aspects of this and the segmentation aspects of this. And every one of these companies is hugely concerned over private espionage, state-sponsored espionage, and the loss of intellectual property. So the minute, what we've led with, and this is an ongoing process, but what we've led with is, listen, this is, you want bandwidth, this is more bandwidth. You want private, this is more private. You want ultimately something that's more secure, this is more secure. Go do your own research. We're here to talk. Crown Castle's here to talk. What we want out of it, and we're very totally open kimono, what we want out of this is you, enterprise, coming to us, asking for data that is going to help you explain and prove your carbon neutrality. The aspect of getting granular occupancy data will allow us to make this building more efficient, and therefore your carbon footprint, or your portion of the carbon footprint that it's allocated towards you, much smaller. So you've got to create a script. There are powerful stories here, and it's going to take, it's a conversation, and it's going to, some will get it in 2 seconds, right, and want to do it. Others will take a little longer.
And I would assume, depending on the tenant, the type of industry that they're in, some are more open to it, and some, as you had stated, may take longer or may never come around to it, depending on. But that's a fantastic approach. It is more of an education. It is more of an understanding. Again, as I stated, in-building cell is, for all of us, everyone knows what it is, and whether the tenants, that is, accept it or not, and the overwhelming, majority have. There are others who say thank you, but no thank you in certain situations, in certain pockets. And, we continue to do what we need to do. But That type of overview, I think, is critical in getting that point across. Because if you don't do it, John, and Rich, I don't know how you really get a foothold, how you get traction in your building, right?
So
Yeah,
John Morris, here's
I
a
just
question.
wait before you go to the question. I do think that there are some regulatory sort of aspects to this that could just kind of support what John and Nick are talking about with Local Law 96 in New York specifically, in terms of how things get monitored and penalties that may be assessed and how that gets passed on between the tenant and ownership and that kind of thing. I actually don't think this is really kind of optional. A lot of what you guys are talking about, it's just a matter of time and how you go about managing that in terms of that tenant relationship. I think education is awesome. I think if you have Facebook or Google in your building and these people are these are the guys that are taking the headlines in terms of that real estate in Manhattan right now. Those are the companies that are actively involved in these private network space. I mean, Google's got their Orion platform for the microtransactions. Facebook's got their Magma core, that's an open source core. I mean, these are the companies that are taking space, from John and Nick here. And then you've got very large players that have a big stake in the space. So I think about the Verizon NFL partnership and the NFL's tenancy in one of John's buildings, I think where the Crown put their system in. And I could say the same for some of the tenants in Nick's building. I think the sell, in terms of how it takes time, but I don't think Nick or John has to educate Google or Facebook on this. I think they're already I've talked to some of their peer group, and they already want to put in their own private network systems. But you have a law office, maybe it's a different story. Maybe that law office or that accounting firm, maybe they don't have the same level of interest in that.
So John Morris, here's a question for you. So real estate company X puts in a CBRS network, and they go around to all the tenants to educate. And the tenant says, gee, Mr. Realist, gee, my landlord, I don't want it. Now what happens?
Well, this is that question to me. I mean, I think, it's such a funny thing. I mean, certainly, I don't think Nick or John want to have a Swiss cheese approach in terms of technology in their building. I mean, pure Swiss cheese approach is chaos, and I don't know that anybody in this environment wants chaos. And certainly, I think everybody wants to control how these tenant relationships happen, with contracts. But I tell you what, if one of these companies is dropping a few $1,000,000 a year on the table for leasing space in a building, it's a lot of money per square foot. They have a lot of power in terms of it. This is my perspective, and John and Nick, you can tell me I'm crazy, but they have a lot of power, and that because they're the ones that create the returns for all your shareholders, for your owners, and that kind of thing. And so, I think, there are ways to turn off systems, but signal doesn't stop at walls, and inside the building, it's going to move around. And, the clutter that comes from Wi-Fi goes in between floors, and this is no different. And so I look at this as being just one of those other things that tenants will become accustomed to over time. Right. And I just can't imagine that people want to be managing their building like Swiss cheese.
No, I agree.
That's really tough.
And I hesitate, and I won't ask the other two real estate owners about that. But I think it's an interesting question, given where we are with DAS systems and CBRS systems and Wi-Fi networks and lobby control and all of those things, IoT. I think it's an interesting part of the ecosystem and the equation and how all this works. So final couple of questions. So John Gilbert, so this took a lot of research. Are you working with, companies that go with you to talk to the tenants? besides Crown, companies that go with you, consultants, people that help, people that talk to these people that explain what a private LTE network is, what CBRS is all about. Is there more to it than just you explaining to them? And how do you see that process working out? How's it work for you so far?
It's just really us, with Crown going to our customers. And it's really, there's a script, and if they've got questions for us, they come back to us. If they got questions for Crown, they go to Crown. I think when there isn't a lot of research, I mean, there is a lot of research. You got to really drill down to the level that, that John Morris is talking about. But net, when you look at, okay, what's the problem that I'm trying to solve? I want my telephony network and my data network to be more secure, but I want it mobile. Okay, well, what's the answer to that question? CBRS. I want to do more robotics in my building. I want to have, robotic cleaning and drive down the carrying costs, or the common charges that my tenants are going to pay, because robotic cleaning is less expensive than manual cleaning. Well, what's the answer to that? CBRS. I want to have robotic parking. Well, how do I do that? Well, all the major automobile manufacturers are all using CBRS in terms of their manufacturing line. So obviously from that, those are robotics. And the reason for that is A, the segmentation, B, the bandwidth, and C, the security. So, as we look at what our buildings will become, and I know Nick is looking at this, we're looking at it, everybody's looking at, in terms of how do we amenitize our buildings? How do we create an experience that people really want? And at the core of all of those experiences is bandwidth and big wireless pipes. Well, CBRS checks that box. So I always try to analyze things, Rich, is, okay, you're bringing me something. What's the problem that this piece of technology or this piece of hardware solves? And if I care about that problem, then yeah, I'm all ears. If I don't think that problem's relevant,
yeah,
short meeting.
Gotcha. Good. So Nick, to wrap up, what are your final thoughts on navigating this landlord-tenant morass, if you will, of making sure that everybody gets the information, everybody's comfortable, you're comfortable, the tenants are knowledgeable and well served?
Yeah, that's easy. Going on those walks with John Gilbert in Crown Castle. I mean, I figured that one out 10 minutes ago, but in actuality, John is right. And I completely agree that the education is really important. Even back in the day when we were, rolling out in-building cell, we were, hands-on, John, just like you were, your tenants, hands-on about what it is and what we're doing and how, we believe that you'll benefit from it and things like that. This is a little bit different of an animal. It's not something that's really well known. And that's why I think, John said wireless, lots of bandwidth, and I also put on top of that security, right? That's paramount. And I think that needs to be understood. And going forward, that I believe would be part of our approach in our world in order to educate, the tenants of our properties, to have them understand, what this is and what the benefits are.
Yeah. And so John Morris, sort of last word on this. This is the future. This is an opportunity for, folks like you in this business to make sure that these go in, instead of 300 buildings, 3,000 or 30,000 buildings. So how do you see the rollout of private networks happening? Is it just waiting for somebody to pick up the phone and get to you, or is it something more?
Well, there's a lot of, from my perspective, there's a lot of proof of concept, proof of, field trials, and there's a lot that's going on similar to what John did with Crown at that building. For me, this is about preparing for the future as you're going about changing your buildings. I think between local law 96 and the impact of COVID, and all of the changes that have already taken place on a lot of these buildings, and how people prepare for work in the future. That future of work with shared spaces and all of the other things that John was talking about, sanitization and all that, you can't have that without the right kind of connectivity. And so, from our perspective, we're spending a lot of time talking to people like Nick, like John, like other folks, and specifically trying to get these what we're calling these proof of concept, these labs that allow us to actually implement the applications. So everything that's of value really in these buildings beyond connectivity is the apps, the APIs that sit on top of those networks that create all the value from, that take the data, that do things with the data, that figure out where the data needs to go, how the data needs to be acted on, and so on. And so for me, driving down on those use cases, spending time with these owners, looking at the tenant mix, looking at the square footage, looking at timing and how you can sequence things with other work that's already going on in these buildings is a really, really big deal. Opening up wells is very, very expensive, and certainly I think that is an impediment. And then the last thing I would say is that these private networks, for the most part, should be substantially cheaper than historically the DAS networks. And so we're talking about an order of magnitude. I think they're about half as cheap because they're configured and built like a Wi-Fi network. And so you're using a lot of Cat6, Cat6 cabling and other kinds of structured cabling that are much easier to deploy. And so, there's a lot of things that we expect to happen over the next, again, 3 years. That's our prediction. I hope it comes much faster. I mean, that's what I've staked my business on. And but we're trying to ride the wave of the propagation of those devices that have the chipset in those devices. And I think that's where we're at. So I hope I didn't take too much time on that.
No, not at all. John Gilbert, last words of the last panel of the Connected Virtual Tech event. I have such admiration for what you've done with the buildings and with your rollout of this whole thing. So last thoughts?
Well, buildings have always had a heart, the engine room, boiler room. Now they have a brain, in terms of what we've created with Nantum. Final frontier is the central nervous system. And that's what we see is ultimately that network that grabs data, brings it back to the brain so the brain can ultimately wrap machine learning and AI, artificial intelligence around it, and then send back commands and actions so that the data can be utilized in a monetized way. So to owners out there, you've got to get your arms around your data. You've got to understand it. You've got to organize it, and you've got to use it. And ultimately, think about it, installing a brain in your building. Absolutely.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it very much. John, Nick, thank you for being here. Thank you all for attending our 4th Connected Virtual Tech event. For those of you that are still in the purple world, please go visit our exhibitors on the floor. They're the ones that gave us the ability to make this a free event for everyone. And I want to thank everyone who participated. Also want to thank my team, Mickey and Peter, for putting on such a great show and helping make these all things work like clockwork, and they did. So I'm really, really pleased. But thank you all for being with me today, and I appreciate it. So the 4th event is now closed, and we'll see you all at the next one. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye, John.